I want to welcome two very familiar witnesses to this committee who've recently been on a keen journey together, and I'm sure they're going to share it with us. I'm told that Mr. Fadden is going to go first, and he's going to stretch the 5-minute barrier. Yes, and General Thibeault, who will operate with his usual military precision and stay within 5 minutes. So with that, I'll call upon Mr. Fadden for his opening remarks, and then we'll go to Mr. General Thibeault.
Thanks very much. Let me start by just saying that there were 10 of us in Taiwan on a familiarization tour, much like the ones that is offered to parliamentarians or the media. All of us have an interest in national security, defense, and foreign affairs. While we were there, we met the Vice President, representatives of 5 or 6 ministries, several think tanks, university, and a number of opposition members. So from my perspective, at least, I come back with a number of my views confirmed and deepened, but no fundamentally different perspective from having been there. So a couple of things I just want to emphasize. Whatever the heck else Taiwan is, it's a vibrant democracy. It has shared values with Canada. It's not a quasi-democracy, and it's not a make-believe democracy. And I would argue that we don't emphasize that enough. It's a very active and industrious private sector, and they're very conscious of the black cloud that is over them from China. From my perspective, a few changes in intensity. One was the extent to which they have a democracy. The population is very much aware of the threat they're facing, but they seem to be getting on with it. Having said that, the government of Taiwan is actively working on a whole-of-society defense strategy, and like any democracy, not everybody's on side. They're having to bring along various age groups and whatnot. They believe that Canada could and should do more to support them, both bilaterally and multilaterally, although they acknowledge very much that we're there and we play with them. And one of the things that struck me was they're particularly grateful for the RCN transits of the Straits. They appreciate that, I think, more than virtually any other thing. I think one of my takeaways was that Taiwan's treatment by China is going to be a bellwether for all of that region and possibly for the world. If China ever invades Taiwan, there's a message for the rest of us, which I think is one of the reasons why we should do everything we can to try and prevent that from happening. Just want a couple of reminders. Japan is only a couple hundred kilometers away. They're doubling their defense budget. They're really worried about what may happen. And if something bad happens to Taiwan, it will fundamentally change, I think, the geopolitics of the area, the Philippines, Japan, and others. 50% of the world's container traffic goes through the Taiwan Straits. So I would urge us all to consider what would happen if that were somehow declared to be internal waters of China. It would have a significant impact on the world economy. So the big thing for me, and I think for General Thibeault, is that over the years, China has shifted the goalpost. They have become more aggressive with naval and air activity. They have become more active with mis- and disinformation and psychological warfare and a whole variety of wares, a lot of which is reported in the media. The West, on the other hand, has not moved that much at all. And I think that's what they're trying to tell us, is that if we recognize that China's pushing, they need help pushing back a little bit. Canada, I'll argue in a minute, as I think General Thibeault will, could do more than we are doing now, although they recognize that we're there. All of our close allies are there to one degree or the other. But there are other opportunities, I think, to shift the way we view Taiwan within the one China policy. We have a one China policy. It's our policy, so how we interpret it, I think, is up to us. So if we wanted to push a little bit more and be more supportive, we could do it. As an example, the policy says that the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs can't go to Taiwan because that will be an implicit recognition that it's a sovereign state. It doesn't say that other ministers or deputy ministers can't go, but by and large, we have not allowed that to happen. And they ask themselves, you know, why can't the deputy minister responsible for digital affairs visit Taiwan? Just as a small example. So there's small things like this. I think General Thibault will give you a couple more examples in the defense sphere. But their view is equally that on the multilateral front, we could do more. And we could do more without enraging China. We might annoy them, but if you start from the premise that, if you'll forgive my use of the vernacular, we're off China's Christmas card list to begin with, you know, annoying them is not very easy. I do not suggest that we precipitate a conflict in that part of the world, but there are a lot of things that we could do beneath the level of the three people I mentioned, without necessarily dancing, you know, what's the old expression, dancing girls and marching bands, but still help them more than we have been. So I'll stop there, but because I want to give you as much time as I can to ask questions and for Guy to talk. But the core message I took away was it's a democracy. It's one of the avowed positions of this country, both sides, that we support democracies. We could be doing more. We should be doing more, both bilaterally and multilaterally. Chair, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Fadden. Mr. General Thibault, 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thanks very much. It's great to be back at the committee, and to the committee members, thank you for focusing on this important topic. Just past the War Memorial on the way here, also just thinking a little bit about Corporal Cirillo and Warren Vincent today in terms of their sacrifice for our country. This visit, I think for myself and for the vast majority of other members who were accompanying Dick, was our first opportunity to really go to Taiwan, and that says something a little bit about Canada's engagement or the lack of engagement in this part of the world. And so it was a great opportunity to better understand this global hotspot. It was a fantastic opportunity to not only meet with government officials and civil society actors, academics, think tanks, but to really get a chance to sort of see the perspective of Taiwan in the context of the threats that are posed by the PRC to the very existence. We also did have a chance to meet with the executive director of the Canadian Trade Office in Taipei, and that gave us a good chance to sort of see where we are actually on our trajectory on relations with Taiwan in accordance with this what's called the multifaceted relationship that's described in the Indo-Pacific strategy. So what do I take as the kind of bottom line for Canada and Taiwan? Well, you just finished your session here with Ukraine, and we've got a raging war going on in the Middle East. Africa is on fire, and so I think it's easy for Canadians to sort of kind of lose sight of what's at issue in the Indo-Pacific with China's aggressive expansionism, the brinkmanship, the dangerous activities that they're undertaking in and around Taiwan, in the South China Sea, in Japan, and in the north with South Korea. And that clearly we're at a time when us, along with our Western like-minded nations, including Taiwan, we're all in an era of persistent conflict, under the threshold conflict, gray zone activities, psychological warfare, with forces that are clearly not aligned with us and are hostile, in fact, to our interests. So certainly I came across with that being reinforced in spades in Taiwan. And at home, of course, you know, a casual review of our own last few years here has the stories of increased state-sanctioned foreign interference, disinformation, cyber attacks, terrorism, theft of intellectual property, attempts to gain control of critical resources, while around the world the actions of belligerent countries, autocratic revisionist states, are flaunting international norms and agreements and undermining the rules-based order upon which Canada depends on for our way of life. So while we're not at war, we're certainly not in a period of peace. And I think that this era of persistent conflict demands that we don't approach the world as business as usual when it comes to national security and defense. And I think this means adapting our thinking, our strategies, our capabilities, and our partnerships in order to counter the threats that we're facing. And I would put Taiwan squarely into the mix of those kind of partners to help us confront this world that we're in. Taiwan fits at the intersection of our values in terms of a democratic, peace-loving, free society, and our shared interest, national interest in national security and peace, stability, and security. So I think all of us who participated in this visit, just as Dick said, came away convinced that Canada could and should do more to engage deeply with Taipei in matters of national security and defense. And this isn't about us necessarily helping Taipei. I think that we actually have quite a bit to gain by working with Taipei. First of all, given China's inevitable rising power and their warrior wolf diplomacy, if we really want to better understand China and what drives their leaders in their society, there's no better partner, I think, than Taiwan, who basically are positioned to help educate policymakers and strategic planners about how to effectively deal with China, given their own geography, their history, their culture, and of course the present threats and bullying that they get from China on a daily basis. Secondly, we have a lot to learn, I think, from Taiwan about how they're dealing with all the same threats that we're facing that I just described a couple of minutes ago. And their whole of society defense initiatives, their efforts to increase national resilience in the face of these kind of threats. To kick off our visit, we had the Vice President speak to us, and she gave us a master class in international politics, in national strategy, in defense and foreign policy, budgeting against domestic priorities, and squaring it all. And what was really striking was how clear the thinking was at the strategic level about how to confront the threats that they have in a calm manner, to not want to provoke China, but nonetheless standing up for Taiwan's ability for self-determination. Finally, if Canada is serious about engaging in this part of the world, what I would say, Mr. Chair, security and defense is the first objective of the Indo-Pacific strategy. And if we're going to be relevant in this area, what I would just say is we need to be involved in the various multinational fora that are coming up, regional mechanisms, whether it be AUKUS, whether it be the Quad, whether it be the Trilat that's established. And Canada needs a seat at the table, and Taiwan needs to be at the table as well. There should be nothing about Taiwan without Taiwan. My view, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, is that it's time for us, I think, to pick sides in this one. If you're looking at who's the good actor, the bad actor, China, in terms of not living up to its obligations under the UN Security Council Charter, is certainly, not looking good when we kind of compare it to Taiwan fully meeting the expectations of being a member state of the United Nations.
And the Taiwanese are excellent at giving master classes in geopolitics. I share that view. Mr. Bazan, 6 minutes. I'm going to go the 6-minute round, and then we have the room till 5:51. That clock is wrong, by the way. And so I may have to cut back on the second round, but let's go for 6 minutes first round.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank both Mr. Fadden and General Thibeault for coming to committee and for sharing your experience. There's a number of us around the table here that have been to Taiwan on a couple occasions, and General Thibeault, I welcome your final remarks there that we have to pick sides, and that it's time to move on and support Taiwan in a more robust manner. So does that, how, and both you yourself and Mr. Fadden talked about the whole issue of multilateral relationships. Is it time for us as Canadians, as the Government of Canada, as Parliament of Canada, to advocate for Taiwan to be a full-fledged member in other international fora, such as World Health Organization and the United Nations?
Chair, absolutely, without any reservation whatsoever. The UN Security Council resolution, which made China the representative of China on the Security Council and in the General Assembly, said absolutely nothing about what Taiwan could do in the specialized agencies and elsewhere. It is, to most people, incomprehensible that Taiwan could not be a member of the WHO or the UNDP or ICAO. So I think if we did this in a clear, step-by-step manner, we could do this without enraging China. Because I do think one of our objectives in this, and I agree with General Thibeault about picking sides, enraging China is not helpful either. But there's a way of doing this if the government decided they wanted to, in a thoughtful way, push far more than we have for membership.
Okay. With both of your extensive expertise on defense and national security, in your opinion, after being there, and then, just last week we saw the PRC using the PLA, Navy, and Air Force barricade and institute a 12-hour blockade around Taiwan, both by air and sea. Do you believe Taiwan is ready for conflict with mainland China, especially when you hear the U.S. Pacific Command often reference the fact that they expect to be in war with the PRC by 2027?
I think that we came away with a very clear view from Taipei and the officials that we met with about their determination, their recognition first and foremost that they have to be prepared to go alone, however things unfold. And so they're determined really to be able to defend themselves, and they're putting the investments in asymmetric capabilities. Their defense budget just has gone from I think 1.8% of GDP to 2.5%, and on a trajectory to continue to invest more. And I think that's all with a view to making sure that they're sending the right messages not only to China but to their allies and friends that they're doing what they need to do within the means that they have available to them to be able to defend themselves. Clearly, the issue of what the PRC and the PLA and the PLN are doing is demonstrating, is probing, is continuing to exhaust the Taiwanese Defense Forces through the Taiwanese Defense Forces being required to stay on the highest levels of alert at all time. So they have a strategy which is really, I think, working to exhaust the Taiwanese Defense Forces, and I think they are in a very difficult position from that perspective. But they're doing everything that they can. And I think that they would welcome other friendly countries to continue to help them make sure that they can defend themselves. And I think that's where we need to be thinking about how Canada might be able to help in the defense.
We saw just yesterday that in response to the blockade that was instituted during exercises. I'm not sure when an exercise actually becomes an act of aggression. You would think if you're shut down for 12 hours that could be interpreted as an act of aggression. But I look at the whole issue that Canada did sail with an HMCS Montreal, I believe, went through the state of Taiwan yesterday along with a U.S. destroyer and Arleigh Burke. What more should Canada be doing to provide military cooperation assistance to Taiwan beyond, sailing through, practicing the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Taiwan?
I think the freedom of the high seas and what we're doing in those transits was surprisingly important to I think all of us about how they appreciated it. So they knew when our ship sailed through, and from that perspective, that obviously resonates with Taipei as being very important. So we need to continue with that. I think to your question, what more to do, I think comes to the last point that Mr. Fadden says. We need to be more creative in terms of allowing, I think, officials to actually engage with the Taiwanese defense and national security organizations. And I would start with, military political staff talks to sort of identify a number of menu items of what Canada could be doing in cooperation with Taiwan. So to me, there's probably a number of things that we could be doing to help not only in country, but I think institutionally with their efforts to make sure that they can defend themselves properly.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses for your attendance. General Thibeault, I'll start with you in terms of picking a side. I'm watching with great interest in terms of what's happening with the BRICS summit that Russia's hosting right now, and that coalition started as an economic one and seems to be more of a military coalition that slowly, over time, we see North Korea's involvement now assisting Russia with the war in Ukraine. And so that group's getting a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger over time. And if I look at what's happening to NATO and what's happening south of the U.S., and we see some saber rattling, of course, with former President Trump, that situation's changing. And so when you pick a side, you want to make sure that your team is as strong or stronger than the others. And that's increasingly, I think, more in question as time goes on. And hopefully all of this has to do with the election in terms of his statements. But if some of the things that he's proposed come to fruition and he follows through on them, I think it presents an issue for Canada and its allies in terms of where we go next, especially in the Indo-Pacific region where China is coalescing a stronger group. So with all that said, your take in terms of picking a side under a scenario in which the U.S. might not be as a reliable partner as it has been in the past with a Trump presidency.
Well, I certainly don't want to speculate in terms of U.S. elections. What I would say is they just celebrated the 75th anniversary of NATO in Washington, and I think when you're looking at real alliances versus alliances which are really, when you kind of look at the nations that are coming together, who Russia is picking as their friends, and I think there we're clearly in a world in which I think NATO is still very relevant, and I don't think that, notwithstanding any posturing or any kind of comments that we may be hearing for political purposes, that NATO is at any real risk in terms of continuing to serve our respective nations. I think we all need to burden share. I think that there is a certain continuity with the comments that the former president made in terms of the countries of NATO sharing the burden, and the United States has obviously been the backbone of the Western Alliance. And so we all need to do our part, and I think that that extends into other parts of the world. And so the partners with NATO in the Indo-Pacific as well, where we've got partnerships now with NATO, with Japan, South Korea, with Australia, with New Zealand, is to recognize that the world is kind of moving in a way where we've got the friends and we've got those who are not friendly. And I think that from that sense, I would hope that NATO will continue, or should continue, in my view, as being very relevant for the problems of the 21st century.
Mr. Fadden, can I ask you the same?
Just to back up one step, one thing that's clear to me, and I think to General Thibeault, is that if China, for any reason, decides to really pop the clutch against Taiwan, the position of the United States is critical. We can delude ourselves as much as we want that we or Japan or Australia can help, and we probably can. But if the United States stood back and did not intervene in the course of the several days, if not a week or two, there's not a lot that Japan or Australia can do. They're the two closest allies, and it would take us a while to mobilize. So having said that, I think Canada's always been a joiner. Sometimes we join everything that's available, but I would argue that in the Indo-Pacific we're not joining the right clubs. And we need to up our association with Japan across the board, not just military, but political and trade. Australia, it's pretty good. There are a number of other countries that are growing at a great rate of not in that part of the world. They're getting to be very good. We tend not to like defense alliances, and I understand why. It's not our history. But in terms of dealing with China, I would submit it's the only thing they understand. So as a possible hedge against the United States not being terribly enthusiastic, I would argue the 3 or 4 or 5 countries that we've both talked about need to start talking yesterday about at least making sure that China understands that if we can't defend them militarily, reject them militarily, there will be severe political, strategic, economic, and trade sanctions instantaneously, because it's not only defense, it's a whole raft of things, I would argue.
Time, Mr. Chair? Perfect. Quick question on the gray zone that was mentioned and the misinformation, disinformation. It almost seems like every study we undertake at any committee here in Parliament is involving these days AI and or misinformation and disinformation. And I guess my question would be, Jake Sullivan talked about 4 projects that they were going to undertake in the Indo-Pacific region with NATO allies. One of them was addressing misinformation and disinformation. Your thoughts on that in terms of the importance of our participation in investments in those areas?
Not just us, but any number of the Western allies. One of the things that our Taiwanese counterparts told us when we were there is that if we thought we were being bombarded by cyber attacks and mis and disinformation, we were barely being touched. They have a problem because there is not unanimity about how to push back. They're a democracy. They're having a big problem. So how Jake Sullivan thinks he's going to be able to help when he's dealing with democracies who all have very different perspectives, I'm not sure. But from our immediate perspective, I think we could quite easily take 3 or 4 departments here, develop an ongoing counterpart relationship. I do believe we're working on cyber with them now. We could do far, far more. But I think they have a problem that may well become ours in the next decade or so if we don't do something about it. And Canada alone can do nothing. We have to do these things amongst alliances and with other partners. And it may mean an investment of intellectual capacity, physical and financial resources. And to, without wishing to appear to be partisan, we've been uneven on that front. And I think we just need to do more.
I'm going to leave it there. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to the fact that Canada could be a stronger voice for Taiwan to participate in several international organizations. You've talked about Quad and AUKUS, but Canada is also finding it difficult itself to become part of these organizations. Canada is basically at the kids' table when the adults are eating at their own adult table. So can that be an advantage or a disadvantage, this situation? Because Canada's saying perhaps we've got nothing to lose because we're not already at this table, or perhaps it's a disadvantage because it's a voice where even if we wanted to speak out stronger, perhaps we wouldn't be sufficiently heard. Chair, I'll start by choosing other agencies, namely the UN specialised agencies such as the World Health Organization and the organisation based in Montreal, ICAO, because we're already members and we have good standing there, good credibility within these agencies. And I think that Taiwan would be delighted if we could accept them as members for 3 or 4 UN specialised agencies. I don't know what Guy thinks about this, but if we're not a member of an organisation ourselves, it'll be very difficult for us to come up with an engagement programme for Taiwan. So I think we need to start in organisations where we're already members and have a great deal of credibility and where there's no reason barring them, because these agencies are not directly linked to national security nor defence matters. As soon as we talk about defence, China and everyone gets very excited and starts jumping up and down. So I think we should start where the blood pressure is not running so high. Well, when it comes to our participation or our desire to participate in these sub-regional organisations such as AUKUS and Quad, I think that when Canada is thinking about its long-term strategy, we can't avoid turning to the Indo-Pacific region and the farther north. And I think that we need to take the necessary decisions, to take the necessary steps to really reset our priorities and our focus. And that needs to be part of our strategy for the region. We've got clear desires, but something needs to be further added. We've got something to bring to this. And of course, it's difficult with our lesser resources. Thank you. Now, perhaps this is going to put up China's blood pressure when we talk about military operations, but we do have frigates that are going through the Taiwan Strait. Is that something that could be planned without it actually enraging China? Could it fall into its own grey zone, an operation similar to Unifier, where we have joint training operations with Taiwanese military personnel? Is that something that we should plan for? Well, I could say perhaps yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a uniformed Canadian regiment. We've got many military personnel from allies in Taiwan that don't wear a uniform. So we can do what you're suggesting, but I think we have to think this through and see how we would actually implement it, not questioning the fundamental idea, but looking at the how. There are certainly possibilities there. I think that perhaps that's the direction we should take and be more creative on military training. Perhaps there's no reason why we couldn't invite officers and deputy officers to participate in our professional training and military education training at our military colleges. So we have to get to know them better, invite them to start building up this relationship with the Taiwanese armed forces. That's my opinion. Can I add something? I totally agree with that. But we have to do that at the same time as our allies, in collaboration with our allies. And we have to think about the communications program and what we're going to say to China. I think that will make things easier. We can do some things usefully alone, but that's not going to change the world. So we need to try and create allies with other countries, and we'll be able to go further then. I've got 1 minute left, so a quick question. You appeared on Power and Politics, and you said that Canada was amongst the countries that was the least vocal and the most timid. So what are the good examples that we should follow in terms of other countries? Well, there's the US, but of course they're in a completely different space. They're a world superpower, but I'm thinking perhaps of Australia. They're much more upfront, as we'd say in English. And even France and the UK are sometimes more direct than us. Now, I'm not suggesting that we never say anything, we never speak out, but we're so worried that it's going to upset China every time we do any little thing. Whereas these other countries that I've just mentioned seem to have a framework, a global overall policy that allows them to act within that framework and doesn't necessarily take China by surprise. But with our one China policy, we've interpreted it in such a restrictive way that as soon as we say any little thing, apparently everything's going to explode. Thank you very much.
It's Ms. Madison.
Thank you, Chair. So what we saw and I was one of the MPs that was able to travel to Taiwan as well, and we saw that ministry entirely devoted to digital affairs. I recently went to Poland. They were talking about a lot of the same things. I mean, we're very, very far behind in terms of education, but is that something that Canada needs to think about when you were talking about those larger issues and provisions of how we move forward in a faster way?
Is the short answer. I think we are far behind. We are catching up in some ways, here and there. But the Deputy Minister of Digital Affairs, in fact, said to us directly, they want to talk to us more than they have been. They want to share more information. And I would guess they have more intelligence about what China is doing than we do. So it's a two-way street. We could learn from them, but that's an area where it's not directly military, so as I was saying to Madame Normandin, it will not upset them quite as much, but we could make a substantive difference if we, again, developed a bit of a program and push forward over a few years.
Full department, though?
Pardon?
Like a fulsome federal department?
Well, a department, agency, doesn't matter how,
Okay.
In my view, form should follow substance. Once you figure out what you want to do, then you can figure out whether it's a part of a department or whatever. But whatever you create or utilize, as long as there's the possibility of direct links.
I want to shift gears a bit, and I want to talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy in terms of India. India has become quite something in the news, and we haven't really, I don't think, put our entire minds to it over this past year. Certainly Thanksgiving was a wake-up call.
Excuse me for a second here. I'm getting some. We did invite the witnesses here to talk about Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is more than just Taiwan. And similarly, both General Thibeault and Mr. McFadden have expertise that far exceeds their visit to Taiwan. So I take the view that these two gentlemen are uniquely qualified to talk about not only past events but current events as well. And we are, if you will, fortunate to have both of you here at this particular time. So my view is that this line of questioning is in order. Ms. Masson, please continue.
I appreciate that, Chair. Thank you. I asked senior officials last fall from Global Affairs Canada and D&D about India, talking about the ongoing military strategic partnerships with the Modi government. We've seen them engage in extrajudicial killings, interference in Canada, and I asked specifically about Canada's cooperation with the India's military engaging in Exercise Sea Dragon. The response I got at the time was only that they would be reassessing engagements into the future. We haven't seen anything change as far as I understand it in that regard. Could you comment on that and whether Canada should reassess those continuing operations?
I think we should, because it seems to me that what has been made public over the course of the last little while has fundamentally shifted our relationship with India. And I know there are a lot of people in Canada who still think back, it's a Commonwealth countries. We were one of the first ones that recognized it in our independence. There are a lot of personal connections. But the people who are running India right now care not one whit about any of that. And we certainly need to find a way, in my view anyway, to maintain communications. We can't break diplomatic relations. I think there's been an agreement. We'll continue on the trade front. But I would argue, and this is not directed exclusively at the current government, we've done this in Canada over the decades, we have a tendency of registering objections to things and not doing anything. So maybe we can register the objection and at least suspend, if not terminate, some of these arrangements. That would be my view, while acknowledging that we have to keep up diplomatic relations. We have to find a way of continuing to talk. But, the Prime Minister and ministers have been very, very blunt in their views of China, but they've only articulated their view. I don't think we have done anything. And I think India will not register our concern unless we do something.
Would a fair assessment be potentially the banning of the RSS or naming them as a terrorist organization in this country, as has been requested by the World Sikh Organization and many Muslim organizations?
I'm not sure that the criteria that we currently apply would make it such that it would be easy to ban the RSS. I haven't looked at that for a long time. But to call them a terrorist organization, point final, I'm not sure. But there must be some ways of registering our concerns other than simply saying so, however forcefully.
The conversations that we just heard and the conversations about, joining the Quad and so on, that includes India. So how does that color or change a response in that regard?
If you join a club, it doesn't mean you love everybody equally. I think that's true in personal life, and I would argue that in international relations it's also true. If the majority of the members of the Quad are our allies and there's somebody there that we don't really like, we can use it as an opportunity to push back on them. So I would not sort of say we can't join because India's there. We should use every opportunity we can with our allies to push back in those organizations.
Do you feel the same way in terms of potentially the expulsion of certain diplomats, whether they be, Chinese, Russian, Indian?
Well,
Terry, very briefly, please.
all I can say is in a large chunk of my career in working in national security, I tried to convince GAC and its ministers to expel people from a number of countries on which we had fairly decent information, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
We're going to leave it there, and we're not going to be asking for details. Mr. Cooper, welcome to the committee. Hang on for a second here. So we got 20 minutes. 20 minutes for 6 questions. That's not going to work. Is that 3 minutes a question? Okay. You're down to 3 minutes, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Last week we saw a significant escalation by the Beijing regime with a military exercise off the Taiwan Strait that included 153 aircraft, 36 naval and Coast Guard breaks. Several of our allies, including the U.S., Australia, France, Japan, and the European Union, have voiced concern. In contrast, there has been silence from the Government of Canada, from the Minister of Foreign Affairs on down. What do you make of that?
First, if I could, is to say that what China undertook was not a surprise. First of all, they expected that when President Lei was going to have on his on the Independence Day speech that they were going to demonstrate, and so they've characterized President Lei as a separatist, and so bottom line is there was nothing that was unanticipated about what they did. The problem, I think, in some respects, is that the peaceful status quo in the Taiwan Straits, upon which we've said we're going to maintain our policy of strategic ambiguity and our one China policy, all without wanting to harm or put at risk the peaceful status quo in the Taiwan Straits. It's changing every day, and the status quo isn't peaceful.
My time is brief. Yeah. Should the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Government of Canada, join her allies in condemning that escalation? I
think so.
Mr. Fadden?
I agree.
Okay. When we talk about engagement with Taiwan, often the pushback is Canada's one China policy. Now, the joint communique that sets out Canada's one China policy says that Canada merely takes note of Beijing's contention that Taiwan is part of the PRC. It does not endorse that in any way, shape, or form, and quite deliberately so. And so often we see the one China policy conflated with Beijing's very different one China principle. So can you just on that elaborate a little bit about the significant flexibility the policy provides and how Canada might leverage that?
But I mean, first of all, as I was trying to say in my remarks, the one China policy is our policy. If we want to change it, we can change it. If we want to interpret it differently, we can interpret it differently. I happen to be of the view that if we do that, we should do so with our allies as much as we can. But it's like any other policy of the Government of Canada. If it is our policy, we can change it. I believe, and I think General Thibeault agrees, that the current government interprets it rather conservatively or restrictively. But I don't think we should interpret it so broadly that, to use my expression, we enrage China. But I think there's a fair bit of space there that would enable us to do a great deal more.
Madame Lalonde, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I first want to say thanks to General Thibeault for your service, and certainly Mr. Fadden to be here. In recent years, certainly Canada has had increased presence in conducting transit, and as we mentioned in our Taiwan Strait, as part of certainly our objective to keep free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, and certainly to reaffirm the freedom of the navigation on these international waterways. This past weekend, and I think my colleague was trying to refer to it, Canada certainly successfully completed a joint transit through the Strait with a frigate of HMCS Vancouver alongside the U.S. destroyer Higgins. This transit was completed in a safe and certainly in a professional manner, but we know that this is unfortunately has not been the case for all transit, and certainly for us and some partners. I would really like you both to speak on the danger of interfering with the transit and the diplomatic implementation of it, please.
I think that the rules of conduct that we had, say, at the height of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and Allied forces were pretty well demarcated about how to work together to avoid sort of having an event that would snowball. And I think we don't have that in place with the PRC today. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see in the South China Sea, in the coast, off the coast of Japan and South Korea, and off of Taiwan. And so we are seeing them undertake quite dangerous activities, and there is the potential for an act that would result in casualties. In fact, there was an event with fishers off of the island of Kinmen recently. And so I think this is one of the concerns, and I think this is one of the reasons why you actually need to continue to engage with China, notwithstanding the fact that we're picking friends and choosing sides. You still need to keep the lines of communications open with your adversaries to avoid things that would complicate things as a result of miscalculation or behaviors which create an accident and kill people.
I think that's right. I'm going to be more practical and sort of say that we're arguably living in one of the most dangerous periods since World War II. And I don't think any country on the planet wants war. What worries me more than anything is a mistake, is an accident. And what I think General Thibault was saying, if I interpreted him correctly, is we have no protocols to deal with accidents, including Russian bombers and fighters that go down most of our coast. We scramble RCAF jets to keep an eye on them, but what if something goes wrong and one of them blows, they blow each other up? There are no real protocols to deal with this, so that's why I think the General is right. We absolutely have to keep pounding the Chinese for a protocol to deal with accidents. But we can't stop, because if we stop and the Allies stop going through the straits, the Chinese will take them over, and that will be the beginning of the end.
Madame Normandine, 1.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Now we know that China provides drones to Russia in the war against Ukraine. To what extent do you believe that the relationship between China and Russia is more an ally-based relationship, or is it a piecemeal one with individual arrangements when it suits them? For example, because Russia could give China a helping hand if there was a possible invasion of Taiwan. Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think there's consensus on this. I would say that they're allies on a file-by-file basis. They're not strategic allies as such, mainly because China is far more powerful than Russia. That's quite obvious. Now, could a relationship between the two cause many difficulties with Taiwan or Ukraine? Absolutely, yes. But China is far more useful to Russia than the other way around. Or rather, China is far more useful for Russia than vice versa. And what really keeps me up at night is the fact that the two countries don't really care about international law or the welfare of their citizens, but I do not think that they're strategic allies. And I think the West should do its utmost to stop this ever becoming the case.
I've heard a number of concerns from the Filipino diaspora who are concerned about the Indo-Pacific strategy and our goal of expanding military capacity, building initiatives with regional partners, which also lists the Philippines. And yet their current government has, taken part in horrific human rights violations. And as General Thibault had mentioned, that we need to be careful of those who are hostile to our interests, and I would consider, human rights protections and so on, our interests. So how do we adapt that Indo-Pacific strategy so that we're not empowering regimes working against those interests to uphold the international rules-based order?
I'm probably not best person to ask this question of, because I think the Indo-Pacific strategy was largely, on the part of the government, an opportunity to revise its policy on China. It was the first time that the government called China an adversary, strategic adversary, and the rest of it was all very important, but I think that was the core of it all. It changed its view on China, which I think was highly desirable. I think we have a great deal of flexibility in how we implement the Indo-Pacific strategy. And you may disagree with me on this, but I think that despite the fact that we likely share the view that human rights are important, we have to have relations with countries, some countries that violate human rights, because the only way we're going to change them is we dialogue with them. There are any number of countries in that part of the world that don't share our views on the rule of law, and a whole bunch of other things. But I think that failing to deal with them through the Indo-Pacific strategy will only make it worse over time. We already have a problem in the world about the West sort of restraining itself and a lot of countries tending towards China and Russia on a whole variety of fronts. It's an imperfect answer to your question, but it's the best I can do. I don't know if the General can do better.
Answer to her question.
Sorry.
So, Ms. Gallant, 3 minutes.
Just to make sure I get both questions in fulsome answers, I'm going to ask both at once. Earlier today, the PLA conducted large-scale live fire exercises on its island closest Taiwan, which is only 66 miles away. How will Taiwan actually know when the first real shot in a conflict is fired? That's question number one. And the West has underestimated PLA's technological progress in the past. And so we expect a war by 2027. But in your estimation, can an armed invasion of Taiwan happen sooner than that?
There's a lot of speculation about what PLA may or may not do, and I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, we've heard the Davidson 2027. We've heard Xi Jinping saying for the centennial that they need to be prepared for the reunification of Greater China. But what I would say is that how will we know? Well, I think what Taiwan has said, they're going to do nothing to provoke China. So it will be they're going to take the first shots. So they'll take the first shots, and that will be the shot that's going to change the course of perhaps that region based on what the PLA is doing. And I think this is one of the concerns about all of their posturing and the exercises that they're doing, the testing, is to say, is this real or isn't it? Is this when they're going or not? And we saw with Russia, building up with Ukraine, and the Americans were saying it's going to happen. They could see all the indicators. And I think with China, we'll have those same indicators. And what I think is probably true is that what we're seeing for the nature of the exercise they have, even though they're really impressive and they're very significant, the rest of all the logistics that would have to follow, all of the things that would have to happen on the mainland, I think that the United States for sure will be telegraphing what China is doing to the rest of the world as well, with their intentions based on the intelligence that we'll have on what China is doing. So, I don't think that there's any real risk in the short run. I don't think that's kind of the view that we saw in Taiwan, that they're expecting to be invaded tomorrow. I don't think the conditions are there, and I think that in some respects China's changing the status quo without having to do that, and I think China would prefer that, because it's a hard military nut to crack in terms of Taiwan. If you've been there, and I think a number of the members of the committee have been there, you'll just get the sense for it. It's a mountainous region. It's a rainforests, tropical. There's very few accesses to sort of undertake an amphibious assault on the island, and it's not an easy problem to sort of I think take Taiwan. And I think China is watching what's going on with how the West has reacted to Ukraine, how the Ukrainians themselves have responded to them, and I think that they're taking note. So I think that would be kind of my take. I think we all walked away thinking that it's not like an imminent problem in terms of that China is about to invade Taiwan.
Can I add 2 sentences to that? I think you have to define what's the first shot, whether it's kinetic or whether it's cyber. If China closes down Taiwan's electrical grid, or it closes down its telecommunications with the outside world, currently, my understanding is that international law does not recognize that as an act of war. A few years ago, it would have been, because it's the same as being bombed. So my only suggestion, I agree entirely with what the General is saying, but I think we, this country in the West, have to develop a more comprehensive definition of what the first shot is. Because the Russians certainly had a number of first shots in the cyber world, and it facilitated their kinetic invasion. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Final 3 minutes, Madame Lampropoulos.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here to answer some questions. I'm going to take us back to an earlier part of the conversation where you both said in your testimony that we need to do more, we can do more, and that a lot of our allies are doing more, that regardless of what it is that we decide to do, we shouldn't do on our own, and we should do with our allies. So can you give us some concrete examples of what they are doing that doesn't, that is not stepping too far and is not setting off any alarms, I guess, that too strong of an alarm for China?
I mean, I'm going to exclude the United States because they're in a category of their own. They do a whole raft of things from the purely military all the way off the spectrum. So if we put them aside, the Australians and a number of others, for example, promote high-level visits. I know that sounds childish, but in terms of international relations, it sends a message that they're supportive. Couple of the countries have better trade deals. You know, we've been working with Taiwan for a while to improve our trade arrangements. I think we could probably do more. General Thibault's suggestion that we could do a variety of things at the staff level with the military. We could promote, you know, they're very keen. They have an indigenous population. They're very keen on learning how we're dealing with our indigenous population, and we're doing a little bit on that. Maybe we could do more. But it's the sort of thing that, you know, I suspect if you ask the Library of Parliament, they could give you 2 or 3 pages of examples. And what's lacking, I think, is an acceptance on the part of ministers that there is going to be a pushback and how much they're prepared to take before they say no. I argue we should do more, but there's a balancing act there somewhere. I don't know, Guy, if you want to add.
Well, I must admit we didn't perhaps have the opportunity to really get a sense what all the rest of the partners are doing with Taiwan when we were there. But I think in the security and defense domain, clearly our policies have been restrictive rather than permissive. And I think that we should be moving in a direction where if peace, stability, and security in the Taiwan Strait or in the Indo-Pacific is the first objective of our Indo-Pacific strategy, then, you know, we should think about the relationship that we have with Taiwan from that perspective. And I think that right now, in defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, I can attest to the fact, at least from when I was serving, we had no relationship with Taiwan and no intersections with them. So I think that that's where I would start with our engagement, is really, at least in the defense and security sector, is to really look at some policy military staff connections to identify the opportunities that we would have with them. And I can think of all kinds, whether it be for humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, they're a conscription military, they're having struggles with their training. I think that in terms of their operational experience, they're not an operationally experienced kind of military. They are defensive and reacting to the probes that they've got, but ultimately in the conduct of operations, I think they would benefit by other partners other than the United States helping them with kind of their institutional development and the strengthening of their armed forces. And so I think there's many things that could be done, but we have to start talking to them before we can really identify what the real issues where we add some real value to them.
To Madame Lambropoulos. Unfortunately, this brings it to a close, and I say unfortunate quite sincerely because, colleagues, I think we have benefited mightily by the wisdom and insights of both of you. I know it's trite to say thank you for your service, but both of you, thank you for your service to Canada over many, many years. And we really appreciate your coming to the committee and talking to us. Interestingly, I was just thinking of our trip to Taiwan a year or so ago with Ms. Masson. Christine, were you there? No. Well, that's right. And James, you were, no, Cheryl. Okay. That's right. And many of the things that you said were observations that we had made. And the one, Mr. Fad, that kind of caught my attention was that we should take 3 or 4 departments and take them all over to Taiwan to see how they do cyber and misinformation and disinformation. And if you want to enhance your defense and security, what the Taiwanese can actually teach us about misinformation, disinformation, the millions of attacks they have on a daily basis is something that we could really learn from. But unfortunately, I have to bring a gavel down and call this meeting to a close. But we really do appreciate it. Colleagues, order of show next Thursday, briefing on Middle East. 29th, we're going to do space defense. 31st, the Finnish speaker will be here for the first hour, and space defense for the second. And November 5th, we're anticipating the presence of Minister Sajan. So, and you might speak to me as well, because the Finnish ambassador is inviting people for supper, I think, one night, and those who might be interested in that. And the other thing is our colleague Andy Fillmore won, and I thought that we would just send him a letter on behalf of the Defense Committee congratulating him. I'm sure on this the enthusiasm may be somewhat less, but the enthusiasm over here will be wild. Yeah, yeah. So thank you again. Meeting adjourned.